Well, it's fantastic to see everyone still here. I can tell you're sort of long-termers and persistent people in the sustainability field, and that's absolutely fantastic because, frankly, it's what sustainability requires. You know, we all need to persist at it and focus on it because it's not going to solve itself in the short term. And SimaPro is a bit like that. SimaPro is LCA software that was started in 1990, and it's, I think, by far the longest surviving LCA software. Many softwares have come and gone over this time, but SimaPro has been working hard to help everyone reduce their environmental footprint and move towards sustainability since 1990. And now we're together with One Click LCA, which really begins a whole exciting new chapter where we can build in more innovation and keep things forging ahead over the next 35 years. SimaPro is used by all sorts of companies, and a lot of those companies are quite different from the ones here today. For instance, Procter & Gamble, they've been using SimaPro for many years. Virtually every company you've heard of or that consumers have heard of probably has SimaPro somewhere in the world. It's by far the #1 software for general LCA type work, and it's also the software that is by far the most quoted in scientific publications. So SimaPro has strength in academia, professors, university research, scientists, scientific publications, as well as lots of businesses in all sorts of fields. So SimaPro can be used to model absolutely everything. So it's very complementary to One Click LCA. One Click LCA is an incredibly efficient tool for achieving a business job of creating EPDs. SimaPro is different from that. You can use it to model absolutely anything, which means it's probably less efficient for one particular business job, but more, multifunctional. There's a few of the LCAs I'm aware of and have been involved in recently. Carbon fiber aircraft versus standard aircraft. Carbon fiber, harder to make, more expensive actually, but it makes the plane weigh less, so the plane saves fuel. So you need LCA to answer the question, is that actually better? Is the greater impact of making the plane more than balanced by the benefit of using less fuel? That's the sort of thing that SimaPro can answer. Satellites. Something I love about this job is I get to go and see all these amazing products and learn about all these supply chains and understand how things are made. I find that really interesting. And I was in a lab when they suddenly wheeled in an entire satellite on a special trolley, and I thought, that's amazing actually, a whole satellite standing there in front of me. And they said, yeah, we use SimaPro to model this satellite. So it just shows you the sort of complexity that can be modeled in SimaPro. Mining metals from the seabed, rare earth metals and so on, you can mine them in the ground, or you can actually mine them from nodules on the floor of the sea. Deep in the sea, there are nodules that are sort of rich in these very in-demand, expensive metals. And so the question is, environmentally, which is best? So they've been working on modeling that. Toys that come with fast food meals. A lot of SimaPro people actually are modeling pretty simple things like packaging and so on. And this project was about what's the impact of toys that come with meals and how can they be made better to have a lower environmental impact. Electric car batteries. There was a big project on working out the environmental impacts of electric car batteries and taking them back and reusing them and reprocessing them. And of course, an LCA for something like that is very worth doing because the thing is so valuable. Things like that and the aircraft and the satellites, etc., I see incredibly detailed LCAs because they're so valuable, it's worth investing the time and money to really get an accurate picture of the product. Innovative options for drink bottles. A well-known large company came up with all these really innovative ideas for bottles for drinks, like a paper mache bottle with a plastic bag inside of it, or a traditional glass bottle, or they had about 10 different ones. And they were using SimaPro to work out what's the environmental ramifications of choosing one of these innovative bottles over our traditional bottles. Medical inhalers, quite a lot of medical companies lately modeling their products in SimaPro. Cosmetics is a big one. For instance, a company has a refillable lipstick pack. You know, lipsticks, the premium ones especially, come in these very beautifully made containers with gold stamping on it and all sorts of things. And this company had produced a refillable one where you buy the lipstick in something simple, put it into the fancy pack and refill the fancy pack. So they wanted to model that. Mobile phones, high intensity actually mobile phones. Anything that has processors in it, the carbon footprint is surprisingly high actually. Tomatoes grown in Spain versus UK. A green group wanted to prove that importing food was terrible and we should grow it in the UK, which is a perfectly valid thing to want to prove. But when they did the LCA, it turns out that growing it in Spain and bringing it on a lorry to the UK has a lower carbon impact than heating a greenhouse in the UK to grow tomatoes. You know, you can imagine it. Imagine trying to grow tomatoes in the UK in winter. It takes a heck of a lot of energy to heat that greenhouse. So they were a bit upset, to be honest, about this result because they wanted to show that importing food was awful. But you know what it told me? Really, if we wanted to be super green, we would just eat turnips all winter and just have tomatoes in the summer. But of course, nobody wants to do that. A new factory build. A company was building a whole new factory in Belgium, and the EU was giving them, I think, 38 million euros funding because it was meant to be more environment friendly to build this chemical, to produce a chemical in this new innovative factory with a different process. But of course they had to prove it. To get 38 million euros, you actually have to prove that when you claim it's better for the environment, it really is. So they did an LCA and SimaPro to prove that. So it just shows you that sometimes big money hinges on having the right results. And chocolate. I was really interested in this chocolate one because I never really thought that much about chocolate, but wow, that is a complex product. That is a whole global supply chain. You know, they grow the cocoa beans somewhere like Sulawesi or somewhere, and then they take it to a processing station and they process it, then they ship it to another country and they turn it into what's called cake, and then they take it to another country and they turn it into chocolate. It's a whole global supply chain, like a pharmaceutical or something. So that made me think, no wonder chocolate's not cheap actually. There's a lot that goes on to make chocolate. So I love learning about all those supply chains and the complex reality of modern global supply chains and so on. Now, SimaPro is fully adjustable. It reminds me of when I was a kid in the 70s. You could see this scene on a lot of suburban streets, people tinkering with their cars. And in those days, everything was adjustable in the car. You could change the timing in the distributor. You could adjust the air-fuel mix in the carburetor. And dads mostly would be tinkering with those things to get them right to make the car work properly. It's amazing how much car technology has changed, where all that is done for you now and you don't even have to think about it. But everything was adjustable, and actually the adjustment was required to make it work properly, or you could mess it up, as my dad often did. But anyway, with SimaPro, you can adjust anything at all you want. It's completely up to you. So there's a bit of a learning curve to getting it right, but there's also a pride of achievement in SimaPro users because they've learned how to do it. They can model anything at all, and they can get robust results. So SimaPro is used a lot in academia and science, but it's also used a lot in business. And it can be used for various things in business. It can be used for life cycle assessment, traditional life cycle assessment, where you do it in detail, you write a big report. It can be used for eco-design and R&D, like, gee, we've come up with an idea for a new package. Is it better or worse than the old one? People in the R&D department are often using SimaPro fairly quickly and fairly often just to work out whether some new material choice or something is going to be better or not. Product optimization and innovation, same sort of thing. If you come up with a new product or you want to optimize it, you can use SimaPro. Carbon footprinting, sometimes people just want to know the carbon footprint. They don't need to know about other environmental aspects, but sometimes other environmental aspects are important. Corporate reporting. Some people use SimaPro to model their entire product portfolio, to report their corporate metrics each year. And they use SimaPro to set sustainability KPIs and that sort of thing. For instance, a company can work out what are the most environmentally important aspects for my business. For instance, a soft drink manufacturer that we all know decided that carbon and water were its two big things it wanted to measure. Because if they don't have water, they don't have a product. Whereas other companies, really, water's not the big issue. You know, water's low carbon, as I'm sure you know, and maybe just water is not what you would choose as your most important environmental metric. So companies use it in different ways. So you can have the LCA experts who use SimaPro. Because SimaPro has a bit of a learning curve, you can be a sort of career SimaPro expert user. And for new graduates and so on, if they have SimaPro experience, they're never short of job offers. You know, it's a fantastic thing to have in your CV, and there's always more demand for SimaPro experts in companies than there are SimaPro experts. So that's been, at least to date, a really strong recommendation for having some SimaPro knowledge. Purchasing might use it for sustainable procurement, product design and R&D, like I mentioned, management for setting KPIs, and sales and marketing for, as you well know, environmental product declarations and so on. So I just thought I'd show you what SimaPro actually looks like in use. The SimaPro I'm talking about today is traditional installed software. You stick it on your computer. Nothing cloud-based about it, which makes it kind of retro, to be honest, but also people often like that. They've got it, it's installed, they don't have to rely on the cloud, you know. You get an output like this at the end where you get to see the flow diagram. The box at the top, the blue box, is your product, and the boxes below it are all the ingredients and things that feed into creating that product. And this was one I did in a few minutes for somebody I was talking to, which was a very simple notional t-shirt. And actually, there are another 280 boxes that aren't shown on that flow diagram. Because you can see all the inputs all the way up the supply chain in SimaPro, it makes you realize there's a heck of a lot of boxes for even a simple product. And it's because all the shipping and trucking has impacts, and the mining and the refining and all the things you don't necessarily think about, they all have processes to create the final product, even simple products. And SimaPro can show you all those hundreds of boxes of inputs. Although often people don't ever quite look at that much detail, you can do it. But to start with, it's not the most visually exciting product. You're just putting materials and energy and so on into a table like this before you get your results. So it's a bit Windows looking, it's not high tech and cloud-based, but of course we now have SimaPro Synergy coming, which will be cloud-based and will be more visually attractive. But for a lot of technically minded people and so on, they love this because it's got all the detail there. And you're relying on data, and I think, as you know, it comes with tens of thousands of data sets. Like, you can model your own steel if you know the impacts. If you know how much energy and water and everything else your factory uses to make a certain steel widget, you can model that in SimaPro. But if you don't know, and you just say, look, we just buy normal steel. There is normal steel, of course, in here, which is kind of industry average steel, and you can just use that as your input, or you can model your own. You can do it whichever way you want. You can go into as much or as little detail as you want. SimaPro doesn't just produce carbon outputs. SimaPro tries to be very scientifically complete. So whatever environmental metric some team of scientists has dreamt up, SimaPro will have it in there, and they're called impact assessment methods. And all those names there are where teams of scientists have come up with a set of environmental results that they think is fair and good and useful, and you can choose whichever one you want. And some people just look at that and think, it's too much complexity. I don't even know anything about that. I just want carbon, right, which is fair enough. But that they are all in there if you want them. And this is the results for one we use quite a bit called Recipe, which is an environmental impact method. And what you get is those environmental results down the side, and along the top it's just the different things that go into making this t-shirt. So you get all sorts of things like freshwater eutrophication. You get results for that. You get results for land use, mineral resource scarcity, terrestrial ecotoxicity, fine particulate matter, ionizing radiation. People get a bit alarmed about radiation, but of course everything in theory has some tiny radioactive potential, so you will get a number for radiation, but you probably wouldn't want to show your directors because they might freak out. Oh my God, we're radioactive. They may not understand that really it's zero in effect. So you have to pick which metrics you want to report. You wouldn't normally report all those, but they are there if you want them. So just to finish up then, all that complexity, what's it actually all about? And I think it boils down to something very simple, which is that SimaPro enables us to understand the complex reality of global supply chains and products and consumption in modern society. Otherwise, people just don't get the big picture about what society actually is and what our consumption really is. So SimaPro does something which I think is important and which you're all working on, so you're all doing something important, which is it reveals the truth. That's really fundamentally what it's all about, I think. So thank you very much for listening to that overview of SimaPro. I've got time for questions, I believe, if anybody wants to ask anything. Yeah?